who Nazis were and why Einstein had to leave his country because of them. What is fascism? Welcome to the second part of A Truly Beautiful Mind, the story of Einstein. While Einstein was solving the most difficult problems in physics, his private life was unraveling. Albert had wanted to marry Mileva right after finishing his studies, but his mother was against it. She thought Mileva, who was 3 years older than our son, was too old for him. She was also bothered by Mileva's intelligence. "She is a book like you," his mother said. Einstein put the wedding off. The pair finally married in January 1903 and had 2 sons, but a few years later the marriage faltered. Mileva, meanwhile, was losing her intellectual ambition and becoming an unhappy housewife. After years of constant fighting, the couple finally divorced in 1919. Einstein married his cousin Elsa the same year. His own domestic life was starting to fail. His mother was not in favor of Albert marrying Mileva. Why? His mother's reasons were, first, Mileva was 3 years elder to him, and second, she also felt that Mileva was too intelligent. They didn't marry then, but later on January 1903, they did and had 2 sons. Sadly, marriage began to fail. During that marriage, Mileva felt that she was wasting her intelligence and was losing her ambition to becoming a physicist and a mathematician. The pair finally divorced or separated in 1919. That very year, Einstein married his cousin Elsa. Einstein's new personal chapter coincided with the rise to world fame. In 1915, he had published his general theory of relativity, which provided a new interpretation of gravity. An eclipse of the sun in 1919 brought proof that it was accurate. Einstein had correctly calculated in advance the extent to which the light from the fixed stars would be deflected through the sun's gravitational field. The newspapers proclaimed his work as a scientific revolution. Einstein received the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1921. He was showered with honors and invitations from all over the world and lauded by the press. His life took a new turn, which simultaneously occurred with his rise to world fame. He finally published his paper on general theory of relativity in 1915. It was proved accurate when he had calculated the light from the fixed stars would change direction or deflect because of the sun's gravitational field. The media of that time, that is the newspapers, declared his work as a scientific revolution. He was awarded with Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921. Remember, Nobel Prize Physics 1921 for General Theory of Relativity. For his contribution towards science, he was congratulated and recognized by the world and by the press. Now, what do we understand by the term scientific revolution? We have written many essays on this topic, but what do we understand by it? Scientific revolution means a drastic change in scientific thought. Scientific revolution emphasizes on systematic experimentation, developments that transform the views of society about nature. When the Nazis came to power in Germany in 1933, Einstein emigrated to the United States. 5 years later, the discovery of nuclear fission in Berlin had the American physicists in an uproar. Many of them had fled from fascism, just as Einstein had, and now they were afraid the Nazis could build and use an atomic bomb. To understand this paragraph, you must learn who Nazis were and what is anti-Semitism. Nazis were members of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. They had power over Germany from 1933 to 1945. This party was led by Adolf Hitler. Nazis were against democracy and practiced anti-Semitism and racial discrimination. What is anti-Semitism? Anti-Semitism stands for racial discrimination against Jews. They follow the religion Judaism. And guess who was a Jew? Albert Einstein. Fascism is a political philosophy that promotes dictatorial control over the land. Coming back to the paragraph, now we understand why Einstein had to leave his country. Einstein had to flee and look for safer grounds. At that time, it was the United States of America. Later, nuclear fission was discovered in Berlin, that is the capital of Germany. Knowledge in the wrong hands can be used as a weapon, and that's why American physicists were bothered, because like Einstein, they had fled from a dictatorial regime. Many of those physicists were worried that Nazis would use nuclear fission to create and use an atomic bomb. At the urging of a colleague, Einstein wrote a letter to the American President Franklin D. Roosevelt on 2nd August 1939, in which he warned a single bomb of this type, exploded in a port, might very well destroy the whole port together with some of the surrounding territory. His words did not fail to have an effect. The Americans developed the atomic bomb in a secret project of their own and dropped it on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. When a fellow worker urged Einstein to approach American president of that time, Einstein immediately wrote a letter forewarning the president that a single bomb of this kind could cause massive destruction. His letter had an immediate effect, but what happened next was ironical, because Americans then developed an atomic bomb and detonated it on the Japanese city of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Till date, it remains the only use of nuclear weapons in armed conflict. This was during the time of World War II. Einstein was deeply shaken by the extent of the destruction. This time he wrote a public missive to the United Nations. In it, he proposed the formation of a world government. Unlike the letter to Roosevelt, this one made no impact. But over the next decade, Einstein got ever more involved in politics, agitating for an end to the arms buildup and using his popularity to campaign for peace and democracy. Paragraph 16 tells you that Einstein was profoundly upset by the extent of the devastation caused by the atomic bomb. He wrote an official letter to the United Nations, where he suggested the formation of a world government. But this letter had nil impact. For the next 10 years, Einstein involved himself in politics, voicing his opinion against the arms race. He used his fame and popularity to promote and support peace and democracy. When Einstein died in 1955 at the age of 76, he was celebrated as a visionary and world citizen as much as a scientific genius. In 1955, he died at the age of 76. By the world, he was recognized and celebrated as an accomplished scientist because of his contribution towards science, as a world citizen because he advocated for world peace and democracy, and lastly, as a visionary. Why? Because he never lacked original ideas about what the future could look like. Einstein, born as a German Jew, truly considered himself as a citizen of the world. But we now know that Einstein was a visionary physicist, a passionate humanitarian, and an anti-war activist. His popularity helped him to speak out on global issues, from pacifism to racism, anti-Semitism to nuclear disarmament. He truly did possess a beautiful mind. This concludes our today's session. I hope you liked listening to the second part of A Truly Beautiful Mind. If you did, do like, comment and subscribe. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for coming back to the channel.